Okay, welcome to this session. I'm going to be talking about med school costs for undergraduates in Australia. So I'm actually a professor in psychology. My specialty is problem gambling research, but it just so happens that I have a daughter that is now in med school, first year in med school, and so I thought and I did a lot of research on med school and helping her gain a place, and so I thought I'd start here by sharing some of the research that I did. And part of the research that I did was calculating the costs, the real costs of med school, because it turns out some med schools are more expensive than others, as it turns out. What's my, I guess, expertise on this area? It turns out that, yes, I'm a professor in psychology, but I also have a former background as a financial analyst at the senior level of two US banks. So I know a little bit about money, have an undergraduate and master's degree in economics, as well as a PhD in psychology. So that's what allows me to do some, maybe expert analysis of what the costs are for different programs. Now, I'm not an expert on medical schools, although I became more of an expert on medical schools in the last year or so in examining all these things. So hopefully, I'll have some useful insights for you about that process. So what I'm going to do is share with you. Again, I hate video editing, so I'm just speaking off the cuff, as you can see, from some notes, rather than going through and worrying about ums and ahs and that sort of thing. So apologies for any quality problems. But anyway, I do this with my students who take my classes. I create videos as well for them, and they seem to like them okay with the ums and the ahs and the awkward pauses and all that sort of thing. But I'm not going to try to do the video edited part of it because, yeah, it's not my expertise and not my interest. Some people love making videos. I like making videos, but I don't like editing them or worrying about what they look like. Anyway, enough of that. Let's look at, and I'm going to share with you, so you don't have to look at my beautiful face all the time. I'm going to share with you this screen that you should be able to see now, that looks at the different costs of medical school as I've calculated them as best I can. Now, how does this work? Well, so my analysis looks at, this is undergraduate medicine, so we're not talking about graduate medicine. There are two ways to get a medical degree. One is to enter as a graduate, that is somebody with a 3 or perhaps 4-year degree, undergraduate. That's the only way to do it in places like the United States, but in Australia and some other places, you can actually enter medical school or start to enter medical school. There are two ways to do it. As an undergraduate, that is somebody who maybe just graduated from high school, although not necessarily. You might have had a gap year or something like that. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about entering as an undergraduate student into medicine. So the maximum programs that will get you to the endpoint of having a medical degree where you can practice is 7 years, and the minimum is 5 years. There are two general ways of doing this, which is there are direct entry programs, and the direct entry programs are where you go straight into medicine. You're learning how to be a doctor on day one. And then there are pathway programs. Those tend to be the longer programs, 7 years, where you do an undergraduate degree for 3 years. And that could be in anything. Sometimes it could be, you could get an arts degree, you could get a degree in anything. Often people get a degree in bioscience, but you usually don't have to. You could potentially get a degree in something else. And then at the end of that 3-year degree, usually with at least a couple of sort of preparatory courses that put you in the direction of medicine. You enter into a medicine program, and the medicine program after that 3 years is 4 years. So you get 4 + 3, and you get 7. Okay, so that's the pathway program. Direct entry programs are shorter. They are anywhere from 5 to 6 years. And so you can see from this that there are a number of different programs. Some of them are direct entry, and some of them are the 7-year pathway programs. Now, you can see also that I've calculated the total out-of-pocket costs. What I did is I calculated it over all 7 years, even if it's a 5-year program, because in order to compare these fairly, oh, I can see these fees are actually being hidden here. I'll stretch that out a bit. So in order to compare them fairly, you really should look at apples for apples comparison. If you're able to go to a 5-year program, then you can actually draw a salary at the period of the 5th and the 6th year. The 6th and the 7th year, you can draw a salary, and that salary reduces the overall costs. Obviously, earning money sooner means that it's a cheaper program because you can start earning sooner, right? And drawing that salary. And so that should be included in a comparison. Shorter programs are in the life cycle of your experience are going to be more cost effective. And you can actually see that in these final results of out-of-pocket costs, where the cheapest ones are always the 5-year programs. Most of the a little bit more expensive programs, middle tier programs, are 6-year programs, with the exception there of University of Southern Queensland and Central Queensland University, which is where I do my teaching. And then the most expensive are generally the 7-year programs, where you do the 3-year undergraduate first, which you have to pay for, of course, and then you have to do a 4-year program after that, which you also have to pay for. And then you have no salary during that entire period of 7 years. So that's why they tend to be more expensive. You'll notice I put it percentages here in bold. What I've done is I've said, okay, let's look at the most expensive program that I found, which is University of Melbourne. Your total out-of-pocket costs after 7 years will be in the range of over $400,000. And I set that as 100%, and then I've looked at the different programs and what percentage are they of the most expensive programs. So you can see Newcastle University of New England, they have a joint program there, is just around 10% of the cost of the most expensive program, mostly because you get out earlier, but also because living in Newcastle and Armidale is a lot cheaper than living in Melbourne. So that's a more minor element of the costs there. So how did I do this? Well, I looked up as best I could the expenses for lodging at the different localities, the fees as best I get, again, for the different universities, what they charge. Not a huge difference in fees between the different universities, but there are some. I gave an allowance for minor living expenses, and then a travel allowance as well, because you might have to travel home for this is really more based on what my daughter was doing, which is coming home from we live in Queensland, and so the travel is really relevant to that. But again, I didn't try to change this because it's not all that relevant as the total the component of cost. Travel is relatively inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. So even though I'm looking at this from my daughter's perspective, it really won't matter all that much from your perspective. I have at the bottom, you can see a junior doctor's salary, which is around, it varies, but it can be somewhere between $70,000 and $80,000 once you graduate from your medical program. And that's just your junior doctor salary. It goes up from there. So that's not a huge number. People think doctors make huge amounts of money, and they do eventually when they become consultants, but it takes a while for that to tick up to larger amounts. And so as a junior doctor, if you are graduating in year one, that is in 2025, you might expect to be around $75,000. And what I've done is in each of the years, I've incremented most costs by about 3% just by inflation, sort of a generous allocation of inflation for all of the different costs. And you can see as I scroll along here, oh, these are all hidden as well. Make sure I show those fees there. Then we go to year 6 and 7. Here's where it gets a little bit weird. What I've done here is rather than saying, oh, what are your fees for uni? I've put in the salary inflated. You can see it's inflated each year by 3%. So up to year 6, year 7, it's going up to almost $90,000 in year 7. And that's not your fees, but in fact, that's your salary. And the salary is like negative fees for university because you're not paying for university, they're paying you to work in the hospitals. And therefore, that should be, again, if you're comparing apples to apples, you should be encountering that or comparing that in your total 7-year costs. Because those early programs where you graduate, you start making money rather than spending money, right? And I've allowed a little bit higher living expenses because usually when you're actually in a professional position, you'll have more personal expenses that you'll have to do transport and that sort of thing to your job. And so you should expect that your costs will go up. I didn't do this much. I just set it at 10% of the salary. In reality, you'll have lifestyle creep once you actually graduate. So you'll actually probably be spending more. But again, to make this comparison fair, I really was looking at somebody who would have a pretty lean couple of first couple of years to make the comparison between different programs fairer in a sense overall. And so when I add up all of these numbers, I come back to the total cost of the program, which includes these negative costs because you're actually making money in those years for the in this case the 5-year programs, and you can see these couple of programs are 6-year programs, and the ones that have costs all the way through, of course, are 7-year programs. So we come back to this. This is just summing all of those costs to come up with how much you're going to be out of pocket over those 7 years. Now, I should say there are little caveats here that this doesn't include things like you can get scholarships and things like that. Those are particularly true of people who come from lower economic backgrounds. You might get scholarships of different sorts. So I wasn't including any of those, but those are a possibility for some people, but certainly not all. And it wasn't the case in our well, actually, it was the case. There was my daughter did get some minor help, but not because of financial need, but just because of different grants and things like that. So a small amount of relief there. But I didn't include that in these calculations because you can't know what you're going to get, right? So going through the list just really quickly, these numbers are not perfect. You may choose to alter these a bit yourself. Let me know if you want to have the spreadsheet. You're very welcome to have it and play around with it yourself to alter the outcomes. But again, I don't think you'll find it to be hugely different, even if my numbers are not perfect. They're a good enough approximation that you can get kind of the idea of what the difference is. And again, the difference are quite dramatic. You want to go eventually to University of Melbourne, then it's going to cost you really an arm and a leg. And if you want to go to Newcastle, University of Sydney and Monash, then it's going to cost you just dramatically less. Okay, so UNE Newcastle is the best value, largely because it's in places that are easy to live in and low cost to live in, but also because it's 5 years. University of Western Sydney, a little bit more expensive to live there, but still pretty pretty cheap and also a 5-year program. Monash is all of these schools are I think good options. Like they're all good schools where you can get a good education. I didn't include every single school here. There are notable exclusions. There's no particular exclusion except that my daughter wasn't, for reasons that are not important, wasn't interested in them, but some of the notable exclusions are Bond, Australian Catholic University, Griffith. There are probably a few others as well, but these are the ones that we applied to. So that's why they're in this list. So Monash is generally, at least for undergraduate entry, is kind of the most prestigious and largest institution, or amongst the largest institutions for undergraduate admissions. Prestigious because it's they're known for good outcomes, large student class, but also that 5 years. Everybody wants that 5 years, so that's really good option if you can get in. But obviously, it's one of the hardest to get into as well. University of Tasmania, also a really great option, although in reality, they reserve most of their spaces for people who are Tasmanians. So, you might get in as a non-Tasmanian, but if you're in Tasmania, that's definitely a really good option because, again, it's a 5-year program and pretty cost effective. JCU has, James Cook University, has a very good reputation. And they're a 6-year program, still pretty cost effective in a large part. Even though they're 6 years, it's in Townsville, and they also have a campus in Cairns where they teach now. It's relatively new. I think it's the first or second year that they're teaching in Cairns, and so that's relatively cost effective as well. Flinders is 6 years, and so that keeps the cost moderate. University of Southern Queensland, even though it is a 7-year program, it is relatively cost effective because of the location in Toowoomba. But I should say University of Southern Queensland, they actually, it's a pathway program. So again, when you get these 7-year programs or pathway programs, you get an undergraduate degree. It's in the medical field in the case of University of Southern Queensland, I believe. And then at the end of your 3-year program, you transfer, you stay in, I believe you're staying in it's like the School of Rural Medicine, but it's actually University of Queensland. So you transfer to the University of Queensland School of Rural Medicine, and you actually do your medicine degree, but you do it in Toowoomba. You don't, move to Brisbane where their main campus is. So it's a pathway program. There are a couple of those. We'll run into those where you change unis to go into your doctorate program, but you do your undergraduate at a different institution. University of New South Wales has a very good reputation, and it comes in about in the middle of the pack. Again, because it's 6 years, and again, because you're most often, not always, they have some places where they teach as well outside of the city, but most of the places are in the city, and it's relatively expensive. University of Adelaide, a lot of people retrain when they come from overseas. They retrain at University of Adelaide to make sure they're up to snuff before they're able to practice in Australia. So people who are come from India or some other place where they got their medicine degree, often they're retraining in Adelaide. So it's a well-known program. And again, about the middle of the pack because it's a 6-year program. It is, because it's a 6-year program, just University of New South Wales. It's medicine from day one. So it is 6 years of medicine. It's not a pathway program. Now, another pathway program is Central Queensland University, which is the university that I teach at. They teach out of Bundaberg and also out of Rockhampton. The medicine program, it is a pathway program, but they have a 3-year program that is very medically oriented for the first 3 years. So you get a bachelor's degree in basically, I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically in medicine. And then you transfer to, again, locally taught in either Bundaberg or Rockhampton, locally taught, but you actually enter into University of Queensland. University of Queensland is the degree you get when you go to CQ university at for your medicine degree, for your second degree. So that's a pathway program, guaranteed entry as long as you perform reasonably well into medicine at the end of your 3-year undergraduate degree. University of Western Australia, it's a 6-year program because it's in Western Australia. The living expenses are relatively high. That's why it comes in, and it's also 6 years. That's why it comes in at moderately high in the expense category. Latrobe is another pathway program. They don't do a medicine degree themselves, but Latrobe for rural entrance, some of these are really restricted more to rural entry, and Latrobe is one of those. But at the end of your 3-year degree, you have, if you perform at a reasonably strong level, unlike some of the others where it's kind of a guaranteed pathway no matter how badly, or I shouldn't say no matter how badly, but even if you do, not terrific in your undergraduate degree, you still guaranteed to get into medicine. Latrobe, you actually have to do reasonably well. I think you have to have maybe, if my recollection is not perfect, but I think you might have to have like a distinction average. But then you get into University of Melbourne after those 3 years, and you do 4 years at University of Melbourne. That's why it's expensive. It's cheap to be at Latrobe, but then once you get to University of Melbourne is expensive for 4 years. University of Sydney. University of Sydney is a pathway program, so you do have it's a very small cohort of people who are tracked in. They do a 3-year degree and then 4 years of medicine after that. University of Queensland itself is also a pathway program to medicine at the undergraduate level, so there is no undergraduate entry directly into medicine. What you do is you enter into a degree. It could be any kind of degree at the University of Queensland for that 3 years. There are, I think, 2 classes that you have to do, mandatory classes, but other than that, you could do a degree in anything. And then you enter a guaranteed entry into the 4-year degree program. Obviously, live in Brisbane, relatively expensive. And because you're doing it for 4 years, it comes in at that higher cost. University of Melbourne, it actually doesn't have a guaranteed entry program per se. There's a preference for students who have gone to the University of Melbourne for a undergraduate program. And what you do is if you perform at a certain level, my recollection is that you're guaranteed an interview at the University of Melbourne for medicine, but beyond that, you don't have any special privileges beyond anybody else who's applying to the graduate program at University of Melbourne. So it's relatively, as a pathway program, I think it's relatively unattractive, despite University of Melbourne generally being considered to be one of the best, if not the best, medical school in Australia. It is very, very expensive if you're approaching it from the standpoint of an undergraduate, and generally it's unattractive to enter the University of Melbourne with the hopes of going into medicine, because all you really get is if you perform at a really good level, you may be able to get an interview, but it doesn't guarantee you any space like some of the other pathway programs do. So anyway, in summary, you can see that I'll stop sharing here. In summary, you can see that there's dramatically different levels of expense for different programs. It shouldn't probably be the only, maybe even the main consideration for which programs you're targeting. I would target all of them unless you have, your valedictorian and you're just absolutely kicking goals. You have to do pretty well to get in medicine anywhere, really. But if you're just way above and getting absolutely perfect marks in your ATAR is hovering around 100, then you can be maybe more selective about where you apply to. But if not, then you should really consider applying everywhere and just looking at where you get in. And then consider the costs after that, because as you can see, if you get in a few places, a couple places, as my daughter did, then you really can choose, and you may want to have a consideration of maybe I should choose a 5-year program because the cost is just so much less. Then again, you might choose a 6-year program over a 5-year program because you really, really want to have the experience of living in that city or going to that program. It's kind of hard to know as an undergrad, as a new undergraduate, or just somebody who's just completed high school, where is a good place to go. I think people can have really good experiences at places that may not be the most prestigious medical school, and sometimes really bad experiences at places that are. So it's really hard to know from that standpoint. I wouldn't make too big of judgments. I think all of these places would be great places to go. Just getting into medicine is good enough, really. And if you can do it in 5 years, I think that makes a lot of sense from a purely financial standpoint. Also from the standpoint of just getting on with your life. There's no reason to delay getting on with your life and your career. I don't think anybody necessarily wants to do that. I think in the broad scheme of things, however, if you do take 7 years to get out, in the broad scheme of your life, you probably won't regret those 2 years, those 2 extra years. But certainly, if you come from a background where your mommy and daddy aren't rich, then it does make sense to think about the costs of the programs, because having that burden, particularly if you're taking on debt, and your parents can't help you with that debt, paying for paying for a 7-year program as opposed to 5-year program really, really can make a huge financial difference, and a huge take off a huge burden of load on you once you become a practicing physician, particularly as you can see, because you start out at a salary that is good, but it's not, it's 75,000 is not a huge amount of money. Again, you can look it up, but you start as a consultant, you are well above $200,000 as a GP, and you can make quite a bit more of that than that as a if you're able to become a surgeon. Not everybody else able to become a surgeon, but if you're able to become a surgeon, you might make quite a bit more than that. But that's not for a long time. Like becoming a consultant is a long time after your salary gradually ticking up um, as a as a resident doctor in a hospital, as you train further, because medical school isn't the end of your training. You think, oh, well, you get through 5 years, you get through 7 years, now you're a doctor, that's the end of your training. No, that's really the start of both practicing, but training in a specialty, including being a GP. That's a specialization in and of itself. And your salary only goes up to a large level once all that training and practice, it's kind of like an apprenticeship, is finished. And you become a consultant after that. You can charge what you want, and generally make quite a bit more. Anyway, that's enough for me. So hopefully you found that useful. Let me know if you need to, yeah, get a hold of this spreadsheet. Again, you can play with it, but you won't find a lot of difference in the at least relative rank of these programs. So it will give you a good idea of what you should choose for yourself. Yeah, thanks for your attention, and yeah, catch you next time.